يا رايحين على مصر مين يبعت سلامي في كلمتين يا أهل الله، مشتاق لناسها الطيبين ودي ياما فيها مخلصين يا ما شاء الله. وفي أزهر العلماء تقدر تقول ما تشاء، ده أنا والله بدعي لهم رب السما وقولوا امين ان شاء الله ان شاء الله. الله الله يا ربي الله الله، ومن قلبي كده من الها صلى الفجر ولف في مصر وحواليها. الله الله على الازهر الله الله، الله اكبر من الدنيا كمان واكتر، لو قلت اوصفها انا مش حنصفها وكفيها.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين، ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم، ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم، ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. In the name of Allah, the gracious, the merciful, to Him we belong and to Him we shall return. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in His infinite wisdom and in His infinite mercy to send peace and blessings upon our beloved Messenger Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive our shortcomings, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to remove the hardships from upon our brothers and sisters across the world. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to have mercy upon our parents as they had mercy upon us. Last time we finished the discussion surrounding a lot of the introductory matters with regards to the subject matter of usul al-fiqh, and we started off by defining usul al-fiqh بالتعريف الإضافي, meaning that we took each part of usul al-fiqh, usul and fiqh, and we described and we defined each one of them as Imam al-Juwayni did. And then many of the terms and terminology that is required in the understanding of ulum and sciences and usul al-fiqh in particular. And now we come to the point where Imam al-Juwayni is going to define usul al-fiqh بالتعريف اللقبي, meaning that you have this term usul al-fiqh, rather than defining it in two separate parts, we're going to now define it as one whole, usul al-fiqh, meaning we're going to define it technically speaking. So usul al-fiqh, he says, طرقه على سبيل الإجمال على سبيل الإجمال طرقه على سبيل الإجمال. Okay, what does that mean? He defines it in its entirety. He says طرقه على سبيل الإجمال وكيفية الاستدلال بها. Usul al-fiqh, he says, are the consists of the general proofs of fiqh and how to adduce them as proof. Usul al-fiqh, as Imam al-Juwayni defines it, he says consists of the general proofs of fiqh and how to adduce them as proof. Okay, so when we're talking about usul al-fiqh, we're talking about the general proofs of fiqh. Right, and I'll try to explain more more specifically. So when he says على سبيل الإجمال, he's distinguishing now between specific proofs and general proofs. A general proof, for example, is something like الأمر يفيد الوجوب. الأمر يفيد الوجوب, meaning that when you have a command or you have an imperative form, فعل أمر, that means wujub, that means obligation. This is a general proof. If you contrast that with a specific proof, for example, أقيموا الصلاة is a specific proof. It's a verse from the Quran that's referring to something very specific. But usul al-fiqh is concerned with general proofs. It's things like الأمر يفيد الوجوب والنهي يفيد الحرمة. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes something a prohibition for us, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prohibits something, or He uses a prohibitory term, what does that mean? That means hurma, that means prohibition. Usul al-fiqh deals with things like the fact that scholarly consensus is an authoritative asl, principle. The fact that, for example, qiyas, analogy, is authoritative. And how to use analogy and the forms of analogy. These are, generally speaking, amongst other things, I'm just giving some basic examples, what we mean by general proofs compared to specific proofs. So specific proofs are anything that deal with specific fiqhi matters. أقيموا الصلاة, لا تقربوا الزنا. Anything that's specific, don't come close to zina, right? لا تقربوا الزنا. أو أقيموا الصلاة, establish your prayers. These are all specific proofs. Compared to general proofs, like we said, the fact that an amr yufid al-wujub, that just a command means obligation. Right? So these are a simple distinction between specific and general proofs. And then he says, and how to adduce them as proof. Okay? وَكَيْفِيَّةُ الْإِسْتِدْلَالِ بِهَا. So this means, how do I actually use these general proofs and derive things from them? That's one way to consider. Another way to consider is taqdeem umur ala umur. For example, what comes first and what comes second? If we have a text, or we have two different texts, and one is am, one is general, one is khas, one is specific. Which one comes first? Am, a specific text, a general text, or khas, a specific text? Which one comes first, which one comes second? These are all matters that are addressed by the usuliyun to assess how do I deal with the text that we have. Okay? So I know that we have general principles, we have general proofs, sorry. How do I then now use these general proofs? Which one comes first? Which one comes second? How do I use them to extract rulings, etc.? Right? The last leg of usul al-fiqh is hal al-mustafid, the state of the one who will use these proofs, meaning the faqih or the mujtahid. And what are the specifications of this faqih or this mujtahid? What does he need? What does he need to know? Also within this we have, for example, matters regarding taqleed and other things. So these three pillars are the pillars of usul al-fiqh. First you have the general proofs, then you have how to use and benefit from these general proofs, and lastly you have the state of the one who will be using these proofs. Okay? So whenever you hear usul al-fiqh, that is what we're referring to. And a good way to distinguish between usul al-fiqh and fiqh, fiqh is concerned with the knowledge of the detailed rules of Islamic law. When we're talking about fiqh, we are talking about the knowledge of the detailed rules of Islamic law. Whereas in usul al-fiqh, we are concerned with the methods that are applied in the deduction of such rules. Okay? So fiqh, we're talking about detailed rules, and usul al-fiqh, we're talking about deducing rules. Alright? So in any book of usul al-fiqh, what you'll find are these three major pillars. You'll have a discussion surrounding the general proofs, right? Then you'll have a discussion surrounding how do I use these proofs, how do I benefit from these proofs, and then you'll have a discussion surrounding the one who is now going to be using these proofs. So those three things, and you'll find them generally in all of the books of usul in one form or another. Then Imam al-Juwayni says, وَأَبْوَابُ أُصُولُ الْفِقْهِ وَأَبْوَابُ أُصُولُ الْفِقْهِ are, he says, the chapters of usul al-fiqh are al-kalam, aqsam al-kalam. 1, the types of speech. 2, al-amr, commands. 3, al-nahyu, prohibitions. 4, am, general wordings. 5, specific wordings, khas. 6. Al-mujmal, ambiguous wordings. 7. Al-mubayyan, clarifying wordings. 8. We have al-zahir. Al-zahir are probabilistic indications. What that means is, al-zahir is a term that is zahir, is something that can have two meanings, where one meaning is more desired than the other, or one meaning is more prevalent than the other. Okay, that's what al-zahir means. Al-af'al, the actions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Then you have number 10, al-nasikh, abrogating texts. Number 11, al-mansukh, abrogated texts. 12, al-ijma', scholarly consensus. 13, al-akhbar, transmitted reports. 14, qiyas, analogy. 15, al-hadhr, unlawfulness and unlawfulness. 16, ibaha, permissibility. 17, tartibul adilla, the proper proof order, or the proper order of proof. 18, sifatul mufti, the mufti, the characteristics or the attributes of the mufti. 18, the attributes of the mustafti, the attributes of the one who seeks fatwa. Okay? And finally 19, ahkam al-mujtahideen, rulings related to the mujtahids. So what Imam al-Juwayni did was, he gave us a very basic definition of usul al-fiqh. And I want us to be clear that when the ulama have defined usul al-fiqh in various ways, this is the way in which Imam al-Juwayni chose to define it for the beginners. As we progress into higher level text, you'll find that the ulama defined it in different ways, and they discussed specifically what is the role of usul al-fiqh. Is usul al-fiqh the actual dala'il themselves? Is it just the general proofs? Or is it how to use these proofs? Is it the knowledge of these proofs, etc.? Is it a combination of both? And so on. So I'm not gonna, obviously for our sake, we're not going to get into details, but I want us to be very familiar with this idea that that in the more advanced texts you have more disagreement on specific roles of certain things and the classifications of certain things. And here he also mentioned for us, he mentioned a bunch of the chapters that we have in usul al-fiqh. And these are not all of them. These are just a number of them. And he decided to share them, either because these are the ones that he was concerned with in his time, or that he was just making it simpler for the beginner to understand that here, generally speaking, these are some of the topics or the chapters of usul al-fiqh. So, then he starts and he begins by saying what? Number 1, aqsamu usul al-fiqh, aqsamu al-kalam. أقسام الكلام, he says أقل ما يتركب منه الكلام اسمان. Alright, that speech is minimally composed of isman, 2 nouns. So I want us to pay attention. He's going to give us once again a very logical progression. He explained to us usul al-fiqh, he defined it for us. Then he says, okay, usul al-fiqh is comprised of these things, and now he's going to give us each one. Now he says, أقسام الكلام فأقل ما يتركب منه الكلام اسمان. Speech is minimally composed of what? 2 nouns. For example, زيد قائم. زيد قائم. These are 2 nouns. زيد قائم. أو اسم وفعل. For example, قام زيد. قام زيد. Zayd stood up. Before, Zayd is standing. That's two nouns. a noun and a verb, you have Zayd stood up. Zayd stood, or Zayd stood up. أو فعل وحرف, a verb and a particle. For example, ما قام. Now, it's important to note here that the ulama greatly disagree on this last one, that the fact that kalam, speech, consists of, minimally speaking, a verb and a particle. ما قام, the ulama say, is actually not simply a verb and a particle, but rather there is a damir here. ما قام هو. I'm not actually just saying ما, no, or ma, not, and then qam, stood, not stood, or I'm negating. No, I'm actually saying ma qama huwa. So there's a damir here. That means that it's not just a particle and a verb, but there's actually more to it. So it's important to realize this simply because at the end of the day, when ulama, when they talk about, obviously in the books of language, they get into this matter much deeper. And they speak extensively about the nature of words. What is kalam? What are words? When does kalam actually mean kalam, speech? When is speech actually speech? Generally speaking, when they speak about speech, they're talking about something that is mufid, something that is beneficial or that can be understood. That when I say these things, when I say these words, a meaning is understood or a meaning is established. Okay? So I just want to point out then this last issue of speech being consisting of a verb and a verb and a particle, that there's a difference of opinion, very severe difference of opinion. And then he says ismun wasmun wa harfun. For example, ya Zayd, ism being noun, harf being particle. That speech is also comprised of noun and a particle. But once again, there's also a great disagreement on this, that Ya Zayd, there is a inherent meaning of ad'u Zayd. When I say Ya Zayd, or I call out to Zayd, I am specifically saying I am calling to Zayd, ad'u Zayd. I'm not just, Ya is not a simple particle, but there's actually a meaning of I call, ad'u. So they say that this is also not a form of meaningful speech. But once again, this is what Imam al-Juwayni says, and the scholars have disagreed. Then he says, وَالْكَلَامُ يَنْقَسِمُ إِلَى أَمْرٍ وَنَهْيٍ وَخَبَرٍ وَاسْتِخْبَارٍ. He says that speech is classified into 1. Commands and prohibitions. 2. Khabar wa istikhbar. Khabar being declarative statements, wa istikhbar being questions. وينقسم أيضا, and it is also classified in other classes include tamannin, wishes, arad, suggestions, and qasam, oaths. So Imam al-Juwayni now, he's going to give us a new set of classifications for al-kalam, and inshallah we will continue that in the next lesson. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam tasliman kathira.
الله الله يا ربي الله الله ومن قلبي علي توضى كده مني الها صلى الفجر ولف في مصر وحواليها الله الله على الأزهر الله 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 أكبر أم الدنيا كمان واكتر لو قلت اوصفها أنا مش حنصفها وكفيها الله الله